What's up, Dentsu Beach House? Thursday. Round of applause, please. We made it. Everyone's standing,
Hello.
everyone's sitting, everyone's tired. Okay. We're going to shake it up a bit. We're going to talk about the biggest topic on the planet. What is culture? How does that connect to commerce? How does that build communities? And we're not going to stop there. We're going to talk about how that fuels brand-led conversations, but also how that shapes entertainment, how that shapes product. So I'm delighted to be joined by three incredible guests. We have, to my left, we've got Jim Squires, EVP, Business Marketing and Growth of Reddit. Jim, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
We've got Annette Mail, Group CEO, Dentsu UK and Ireland. Say hi, Annette.
Morning, everyone. My voice is going, but I will speak a bit quietly.
I'm right there with you, definitely.
Thank you. We are crawling to the finish line, guys. And to our left, last but not least, we have Jordan Peters, Senior Director of Marketing Partnerships, Netflix EMEA. Hello, Jordan.
Hello.
So we're delighted to be here today, and I wanted to start with an unanswerable question, which is about culture in its broadest sense. Now, this is an age-old thing that brands, especially on the agency side, I'd say, have been grappling to try and crack that secret nut. How do you get to fame? How do you get to cultural resonance? How do you get to effectiveness? But I think over the past 5 to 10 years, marketers, platforms, agencies alike have all come to understand this is a very hard-nosed tool. This isn't a soft, amorphous thing. But I'm very curious to understand how each of you are talking about cultural impact and culture more broadly within your organizations. And maybe I'll start with Jim, because front page of the internet, community to end all communities, you aren't thinking about it as this big, homogenous end state. Culture is defined in some of the smallest as well as the biggest moments for you. So talk to us about how you're seeing it internally.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because Reddit is not a viral platform. We don't even think of it as a social network. We think of it as a community platform. And there is this dynamic where the average post on Reddit actually is still getting views 6 months after it was posted. So there's much more of a long burn. The viral trends start on Reddit, and then they start spreading out into other platforms. And so these emerging trends, I think the most important thing is to listen, try to understand where people are at, what they're feeling, what they're talking about, and that's what happens on Reddit. And these things like movements start there. So electric vehicles, gender fluidity, crypto, these are all things that people were talking about and thinking about and kind of understanding many years before on the Reddit platform, and so that's how we think about it.
Which explains some of the big bets you've made around sort of community intelligence, Reddit Pro, how you're powering search with Gemini. Does it have some bearing on how you're thinking about that long versus short-termism? Because you're not just reading the sort of algorithmic signals of now, you're going, what's going to have genuine meaning here?
It does, and we want to, there's 100,000 plus communities, there's billions of conversations, and so we want to help businesses and brands tap into that and understand what they can actually do. And so community intelligence is what we call the collective knowledge from the billions of conversations that are happening on the platform. And we use that to power all of our ads products, our insights tools, everything that we do is powered by those conversations.
Awesome. Annette, how are you seeing it in the world of agency land, partnering, all manner of shapes of brands?
All manner of shapes of brands. I think for me, culture, even personally, in terms of from a leadership point of view, how building culture and building, everyone talks about a good culture. What's a good culture? And also listening to Jim, it is about how people feel, how people behave, and how they end up acting as part of that culture that is being built. And I think there's a lot now around, obviously, empathy, but also really showing up in an authentic way. I know that word is massively overused, so apologies. I was trying to think instantly of a different word, but it came out of my mouth. And I think you just see more brands in terms of being clear around what their purpose is, and if they're staying to that, then how that actually unpacks can show up in a positive way for business, but more importantly, how it makes people feel and act.
I think it's such an important point. I was at a trust panel earlier this week, and they were looking at the sort of the generational dynamics of what builds trust. And for every generation apart from Gen Z, it's just facts and transparency. And for the young generation, it's that plus authenticity, which again sounds like a soft kind of feeling-led word, but that is so critical to whether they will give you the time and welcome you into their world. So think did you want to build on that?
I mean, we see that there's this no, I'll throw it to you, Jordan.
It's all good, Jim.
Diminishing trust in algorithms and influencers and AI-generated content, and so that's Reddit is the most human place on the internet, and so there's this desire, and I think that's really what's driven Reddit's growth, especially over the last couple of years, is this desire for more human interaction, the real perspective on things. AI can't test drive a car, but people can, and there's no right answer to what car should I get. The answer is 100 comments of people trying to triangulate on what might work best for you.
Awesome. Jordan, what's culture?
Yeah, I think, Jim, you said the word interaction, and I think that's really the core of it. You're trying to connect with something that people deeply care about on a personal level, and you're trying to have a conversation with them where you show up as relevant with them. And we have a word for it at Netflix, which is fandom. So I think pretty much everybody on Netflix would describe themselves as a fan of at least one show. And if you get in a taxi and you tell somebody that you work for Netflix, you realize that everyone in the world is a fan of at least one show, right? You realize that very quickly. But I think about 2/3 of Gen Zs have recently told us that they would describe themselves as obsessed with at least one show on Netflix, which means they think about it long after it finished. They want to talk to people about it. They want to interact with it. They want to wear the clothes, eat the food, play with the toys, whatever it might be. They're obsessed with that fandom, and it goes long past the moment where they've watched the show. So if brands can find a way to show up and interact to that point, whether it's on Reddit, whether it's in any other way, then I think fans really appreciate them for it, and that's really important.
You had a beautiful quote that you shared earlier.
Thank you. It was... We did a piece of research on fandom, and somebody said, and I really liked this. They said, I didn't get the tattoo because I liked something about the show. I got the tattoo because the show liked something about me. And I think we really see that time and time again in terms of, actually, it's really important to engage with them because they're seeing something reflected back on the screen that they see about themselves, that they love, that they want to talk about and express in some way. So if you do it well, they love you for it. And when they love you for it, other things happen to your brand. Your brand engagement, sentiment, brand love will go up. They'll talk about you more. They'll go to shops. They'll buy your product. They'll use them more, and they'll tell their friends. So you just have to do it in a way, and I'm going to use it, that's authentic.
Yeah, it's interesting. All three of you are talking about building cultural connection in a deeply human but much smaller, intimate relationship sense. It's no longer those mass moments. And that's partly an indication of our media landscape and the way that you can reach audiences, but it's also an innately human thing. So I think that's an awesome learning for brands to take forward. I'm going to move us into sort of a bit of an elephant in the room, but I guess we embrace this as well at Dentsu. We talk about the algorithmic era. We talk about the power of data and insight to fuel conversation, to fuel decision-making, investments in either brand partnerships or programming and content. How are you, and are you even seeing this as a dichotomy? Because there is a world in which we talk about not diluting pure creativity. So if you're a brand owner, you want to put out the stories that matter to you because of your brand DNA. Or if you're a broadcaster or a platform, you have a set of belief states and you have stories that you believe need to be told. How are you treading that line in your respective worlds? And maybe I'll start with Jordan on this one.
Yeah, I think for us, we're very lucky. We have a superpower at Netflix, which is actually we can tell in advance when there's going to be a massive moment in culture. So that's a real privilege, to be honest. But I could tell you right now that at the end of this year, one of the biggest moments in the world in terms of fandom, engagement, and culture will be the release of Stranger Things, the finale, the final season. And we know right now we have 37 million people who are fans just of Stranger Things on our social channels. We have billions of impressions for the work that we do. So we know there will be a moment in culture. That's led by data. We can tell you that in advance. And then we can prepare for it. So at Netflix, we can think about, well, how do we want to show up? What are the narratives and themes and characters that they respond to? What do they like playing with that we could create for them? How do we start a conversation, just from us, but also with our partners? And then we can sow some seeds and we can see what bubbles up. So exactly to your point about those communities on Reddit or TikTok or any other platform, what are they responding to and how can we react in the moment? So it's a combination of getting there a long way in advance with the data that we have today and then seeing what pops. And that's a real art and science, I think.
And perhaps I'm attributing too much meaning to this, but I'd argue that we're seeing Netflix making more proactive cultural bets on new conversations to start. So if you think about the impact of the Post Office documentary, the Post Office show last year from ITV, to see a show like Adolescence now coming from Netflix, opening a really difficult, socially knotty conversation, data and signals and retrospective conversation couldn't have told you to do that. But you've put that out into the world and you've sort of made a braver bet that it might not speak to a fandom, but it's gonna strike a chord with people.
Yeah, I think our singular mission is to entertain the world. And it would be easy to look at that and say, well, that sounds like only fun, playful content. But entertainment means many, many different things to many people. And there is no doubt the world was entertained and moved by a very serious and important subject in adolescence. And it very swiftly became one of the most watched shows in the world ever. But it's actually a very hard-hitting drama set in Liverpool about a serious topic. We couldn't have known in advance that was going to happen. The genius of Netflix is that the product picks it up. So when people start watching that show and they watch it very quickly, they devour it, they start telling their friends about it, the product will see that and it will say, actually, this is the kind of viewing we rarely see. Maybe I'll show it to some people somewhere else in the world and see what happens. And within literally a few weeks, a show can go from becoming a regional, hard-hitting drama to a global phenomenon.
Well, we're going to go on, Jim,
I was
please.
just say, hearing you talk, the crossover between Netflix and Reddit is so interesting because as you prepare for Stranger Things and to get that out into the world, everyone on Reddit is buzzing, talking about that, like all the theories, everything occurs on Reddit. We have a new consumer product called Reddit Answers, which is essentially an LLM front end into Reddit. Yeah, it's our search product. And what we see in there is people are in there asking about Stranger Things, catch me up on the previous seasons, what happened, what were the predominant fan theories that we think are going to play out over the coming season. And so there's a nice kind of marriage between that of these fandoms and these people that are so excited for these new shows to come out, talking about that within the communities.
Yeah, and I love that as a Reddit being that barometer for the depth and quality of engagement as well. I think, we've all used social listening and search tools to sort of understand, is something popping off in culture? But that level of insight to go, what are the weirdest parts of this that people are talking about, and how might that inform your brand integrations, your partnerships, your franchise extensions? So there's a beautiful thing here. Annette.
Yes. When Jordan was talking, one question I was going to ask him, I know you're the question master, but
No, I like it.
Was there any shows that surprised you based on not knowing data? And then you actually answered, I think, with Adolescence as one of those examples. Has there been a reverse as well, where you actually thought something was going to be hugely successful, and then it didn't quite?
Yeah, I mean, that's
Sorry to take
We
over
weren't
questions,
supposed to ask
Jessica.
the when it didn't work questions. Go on,
No,
Jordan,
no,
she's
no,
asked
no.
now.
As in just a surprising moment.
Surprise.
yeah, I wouldn't call that individual titles, but I think what we have, I think actually what we have learned is there was maybe a phase where what we tried to do is create global shows. There was a little bit of like, what can resonate right around the world that everyone will love? And I think our content team would openly say, we learned over time that if you try to do that, you end up watering down what people love about the show in the first place. So we're very clear now, actually. We have very strong content teams in individual countries right around the world whose primary goal is to make shows for that country. Adolescence was made for the UK, no question.
Love it.
It just resonated globally.
No, I love it. And it wasn't meant to be
No, it's
pulling
absolutely
out, I
fine.
think.
I'm very comfortable.
I think what Jordan and Jim have said really resonates. And I think there's agencies as partners to brands is very focused on all the data points because it's about obviously driving performance and making sure it's delivering positive impact for the business. And there is the balance of, yes, having all the data and all the signals and all the insights. I do still think, and I always even say personally myself, there is a little bit of instinct in terms of just trusting that instinct as well. And so it's not data versus instinct. It's the plus.
I love that. An example that we often talk about is Mondelez in this space, and we'll come on to talk about it a bit more, but I think the social playground that brands are now afforded is the perfect space to sort of test, try instinct, not try out different personalities as an authenticity factor, but see how you're going to build that credibility. And because so many of the brands we work with there are US originating brands like Oreo, it took us a year to get to the right tone of voice, expression of that connection. What is the right flavor of play for this market? So I think that direct response with your consumer helps as well. Signals and instinct. Good stuff. Okay. Hold on. I'm not done question 3. Okay. We're going to take a few steps back now because you touched on this before, Jordan, and we talk at Dentsu about building brands in different ways. So where you might once have been able to reach and achieve mass culture, we talk about building brands on broadcast or entertainment that would one-to-many. We then kind of move to the performance area you're talking about, one-to-one, functionally targeted to you, assumed interest, that's going to be effective. And now we talk about this era of being in the era of influence, advocacy, which is much harder to achieve, much harder to control. So that's why we also talk about moving from brands or entertainment platforms controlling to conducting. But it is ultimately the space that we're all going to have to measure more effectively. So how are you thinking? And I wonder if there's examples of brand partnerships. So let's take a more commercial lens on this, around how we are conducting these conversations with our customers that have an effectiveness bent to them. So Jordan, you were talking about some of the partnerships you brokered in an authentic way to build those brands.
Yeah, I think it's really important. So we have conversations with partners a lot where we really encourage them in the first instance to steer away from talking about our fans and their fans as targets. So brands can very, I think, quickly get into performance marketing language of impressions and reach. And I can tell you, when you get in that taxi and you talk about Netflix, no one says, you know what I love about Netflix is when you force me in a consumer journey tunnel.
We love the Netflix funnel.
No, that's never been a conversation I've had. So performance marketing is very important, but it works in partnership with brand equity and brand building, and those two things are multipliers. There's been lots of chat about that here at Cannes last year and this year. So the conversation we have is, what you're trying to do here is have a genuine, authentic conversation with these fans. Let's build a world. So we have a team of strategists that will work a long way out with the brand and say, what do you stand for, but what do these shows stand for? What do these fans respond to? What characters do they love? What narratives do they play with? Let's find a strategic oversection where we can do something together. And then we hold their hand right through the process, talking to showrunners, maybe working on the scripts with the people who make the film, going to the sets, producing the spots. So it feels like something that could have come from Netflix itself, even when it's in partnership with a brand. So when someone sees that as a fan, they're like, I love that you made this. I love that you've done this because it's actually reflecting back what I love about the show and maybe what I love about myself in that show. So when we do that well, that conversation starts. And as I said before, the brands just have to hold our hands and trust that the outcome of that will be brand lift, brand sentiment, footfall, purchase, all of the metrics that we would traditionally look for in performance marketing.
Where do you think advertisers are on that journey with their ability to buy that shape of entertainment partnership? Because that is quite, as you say, it's a leap of trust.
Yep.
To go a big bet on a cultural property that we think the signals are telling us is going to be effective. Don't worry, it's going to transcend the funnel. Don't worry, it's beyond performance. That feels like a big bet to make at a time of sort of economic caution and everything has to work. Every dollar has to work.
I think because more and more brands are seeing that challenge of cutting through in culture at a time where you're trying to do both. You're trying to get scale at the same time as relevance. And then they see these huge moments that they could tap into through Netflix, which we can predict in advance. As I say, that's our superpower. More and more are having the conversation with us right now. So we're engaged with many, many, many brands who are super excited about doing this and starting the planning process. And the more they do it, the more they see those metrics show up on our own platform, because we can obviously track everything on our platform. They see it turn up in their own channels, in their sales, and then they come back to do it again. So we've had many examples of that with brands we're speaking to right now.
Beautiful flywheel, Jim.
It's also not either or on the performance versus brand for us. Like we actually see that when you we have a new product where we pull conversation summaries about that product into the ad format. And so, yes, like at the upstream, you want to understand what are the insights, what are people talking about, what are they feeling, and then you want to actually use that to drive performance on the platform, on Reddit and elsewhere. And so that's where we kind of see the marriage. And so ultimately, to drive that lower funnel performance, you have to have something that is very relevant and compelling and engaging for that user. And so actually by tapping into the insights, that's how you create something that is going to really resonate and actually drive that lower funnel performance. And then of course, measurement is really important to understand that,
Exactly.
but that's how we think about, we don't think about it as different things, we think about it as working together.
I love that. And because Annette asked one about where it's maybe not worked, I'm very curious. Reddit was born as a community of communities. It was for the people, by the people. They're literally voting up algorithmically, where should this content sit, where should it rank, do I care about it? Have you seen any, and you don't need to name names, but missteps from where brands enter that conversation? You can harness all the insight in the world, but if you're not reading the room, which is dominated by your communities, that's a quick way to lose trust.
A couple things of this. So one, other platforms encourage you to start organically and set up a presence and start doing their organic activity and then go into the paid advertising. And we actually flip that on Reddit with the easiest way to get in, because to monitor all what people are listening to and what they're doing, and to not have missteps and engage in communities and actually comment, it takes a lot of focus and effort to do that. So that to me is the level up that we see the businesses that are really succeeding and really driving impact are able to do. But many businesses they just run ads, they turn comments off, which is totally acceptable, even though all the magic happens in the comments on Reddit. They start there, and then they start elevating in. And the missteps that I see are, if you don't show the human side of your brand, or you act in a way that you wouldn't act in the real world, is where you run into things. So for example, when you're going into a party just as an individual, you don't just run to the front of the party and start shouting and being really salesy and marketing what you're doing. You kind of ease your way in, you're talking to people there, and then you start kind of making some points as you go through. So it's very intuitive. Like you kind of want to handle these communities like you would in the real world with human, because it's the most human
Don't arrive
place.
and be weird and shout at the dinner party.
Exactly.
Just be normal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked
Don't be
actually-
weird, just be normal.
Don't be weird. And this is also not weird, but I heard you talking in another conversation about a nappy, or rather diaper brand that had entered a conversation for the first time, and they didn't just show up with a, hey, I'm a cool mum, don't worry about it. They lent into some of the uncomfortable conversations around price sensitivity and customers' experience, and I just think that's such a brilliant use of that space.
So it's called No Reception
That's
Club.
it, yeah.
And they do these travel bags for kids, and they were actually elevating and doing great work on the platform, and they left their comments on for the ads, but then they started getting these negative comments about the price and how expensive those were. And just to your point, they just engaged within these comments and talked about the lifetime warranty, the sustainability, the features, the materials. And by the end of the conversation and campaign, people had it turned the tide, because they weren't just marketing with talking points, they were actually speaking and engaging, and people really respected that.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant example. Annette, how are you thinking about carrying those conversations and not just shouty campaigns?
Yeah, and actually listening to Jim, especially on the moment where he was saying about the building relationships, definitely don't be weird.
Don't be weird.
But when you think about when you feel really heard, is when you've met someone and they're talking to you, but they're not just talking about themselves to you. They're actually asking questions. They're being really curious. And then you're thinking, oh, they get me. And they're showing interest, and then they give something back. There's that point. And I think the conducting versus the pushing broadcast is really important. If you think of brands like, we work with Waitrose, very loved British brand, passion for food, provenance is really important. But apart from obviously beautiful campaigns and ads that are produced, how can we connect with those communities? So building cooking schools and hosting those cooking schools, thinking about podcasts and the conversations that people want to hear from those brands. So I love and we talk a lot about the conducting and working with brands rather than the broadcast.
I love that. Just one thought that was prompted, because I think all of you are talking about that desire to be connected with in a more human way, pull them into the fandom, pull them to spaces where they'll be seen and I guess end up with a tattoo, Jordan. But we did a piece of research with The Outsiders in the UK that is designed to understand the mass working class. I think as an industry we've been terrible at either researching niche adland bubbles of, you know, special experiences or going to the furthest reaches of diversity, and actually they're going, let's look at the technical majority in this country. What do people actually want? And there's an uncomfortable retrenchment from technology, news, there's overwhelm, and people are sort of moving to a place of coping, taking back their agency by stepping back from those mass cultural moments and the ways in which, quite frankly, brands reach people. But we identified that there's this greater opportunity now for brands to play that role in helping those individuals refine their tribes. They're online, they're in different spaces, they're through entertainment, but actually help that very human need to almost reconnect, ironically. And I think, Jordan, you were talking about that a little bit earlier on in terms of the role and the way that you think about Netflix in pulling people back in.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much conversation going on right now about the power of the algorithm and the personalized feed, and that feeds into how can you be more efficient and more in that singular individual moment. Funnily enough, I think there was a Spotify report that suggested like Gen Zs are starting to say, I think 80% of them were saying actually they now think of niche culture as going mainstream. Because the other thing about what's happening on digital is it's getting better and better and better at connecting those people who are passionate and talking about the same things in the same way that Netflix does. It finds people right around the globe that are watching and loving the same shows, and it turns them into global phenomenon. So I think, to be honest, just sitting staring at your phone on an individual phone is quite a lonely process, and I actually think people are crying out for those bigger moments of connection and those bigger moments of fandom that everyone can be a part of. So we very much are trying to tap into that, and we're trying to bring partners on that journey with us.
I think you're telling us that entertainment and brands can solve it.
I
think that's
we
what
can
we're
be
hearing.
a part of the solution.
We can be a part of the solution.
Exactly
No, I want a time check because we started a bit late. We're supposed to end at 10:30. Shall I ask one more question, or shall I go straight to like insights and advice? No, okay, right. I want to go global to local. So, we think organisations like yours, Jordan, are incredibly good at going, speak to the masses, find those cultural tentpoles at a global level, and the rest will follow. Jim, you obviously lead on the premise that insight has to start in those tight communities and connections, and they'll sometimes be locally defined or they'll just be interest defined. And we are working at all the mad altitudes that we have to based on where our clients are starting their conversation. How are each of you thinking about balancing that scale, efficiency, impact? This is globally universal enough. It's one of the founding principles of advertising. If you go high enough, you'll get to something universal, versus that desperate need people have now to feel seen in their locality.
I mean, it gets overwhelming, everything we're talking about, especially navigating Reddit with hundreds of thousands of communities. And to your point, there's global things that are emerging and micro local trends that are emerging. So the question is, well, how do you find out what's going on and tap into it? And so that's where we've invested a lot, is just to make it easy to navigate so that you can get in through data and insights. We have Reddit Pro, which is a free product that anyone can jump in and start using and start seeing for your brand or for your category, what are people saying? What are the communities actually popping? Because you will immediately discover there's a community, One True God. Does anybody know what that is?
One True God, everybody.
It's a community dedicated exclusively to Nicolas Cage. That is the
Chris
the
McKibben's
community.
in that one.
So, yes.
That's his favorite subreddit.
So
Face Off.
Like there's this vernacular, and there's like all these different things that you would never just stumble upon. And so using the insights tool is how we've tried to make it easy to find, oh, these are some really odd or interesting things that are happening globally as well as locally that we should tap into and think about pulling in.
That's a beautiful way to reframe globality, isn't it? And I think there's also, like, you know, we've spent a lot of time in our industry looking at big data partners through acquisition or otherwise, and it's that translation job to go, what of that is actually going to be universal? What of that is actually going to translate? Clearly, Nicolas Cage. Thank you. Jordan, any thoughts?
Yeah,
Local.
I think we're very lucky in that a lot of our starting points are the shows themselves. And to the conversation before, we do a lot of listening, and we listen to what people are picking up and what they're responding to. But those shows have themes that really resonates. So Stranger Things is really about 80s nostalgia. It's a love letter to Steven Spielberg and the movies of the time. It's about friendship and growing up and that journey we all go on as teenagers and the connection between them. That's really what's at the heart of that show. Wednesday is about embracing our outcast energy, right? It's about whoever you are, just show up as your authentic self. Squid Game is about this brilliant irony of childhood games surrounded by really what's going on in Squid Game, and it's actually surprisingly playful, and you can actually have a lot of fun with it. But those themes are what people respond to, but how those themes show up in each market is often quite different. So fans will just embrace those themes in different ways as it resonates in that country. So our job is to have local teams who will take those common themes, and they won't do something completely different, but they will do something that's locally relevant,
Yeah.
and that's the journey.
And that's another lovely point around kind of conducting the story, right? Like you take it 80%, but that 20% is open for interpretation. That can be a local
Exactly.
thing, that can be a community thing. You know, I cried for really weird reasons about Toy Story, but, you know, I'm a mum. It's weird. Okay. Annette.
I Cry It Up is the one,
Oh, I
the one
can't.
film
Yeah, it's awful.
that I always cry, that opening few minutes. And I agree, when we're working, again, especially with global brands, but and they've got a footprint across different markets and regions, I think historically, we all remember this, it was very much a matching luggage, something created, assets, let's do some transcreation and push them into the markets. That's just completely changed. And I do think everyone's talked about making sure we're understanding the local nuances and even attached to a brand which is globally known, but how does that feel and show up at a local market and bringing those insights in. Someone said to me, I want to claim it for myself, but I'm really hard at claiming other people's lines. They were saying, when you're thinking about global and building campaigns, think of it more as a jazz band, not as a marching band.
Oh.
So marching band, everyone's obviously marching to the same beat. A jazz band is that you are working to the same melody, but everyone is improvising for who they're talking to and what their audience is at that moment in time. So I really like that. So that one sticks with me.
I can't not see Will Ferrell doing jazz flute when you say that, but I will try my best. Freestyle. Okay, I'm going to ask each of you for a piece of advice for this audience, which I will explain to you as a mix of agency leaders, advertisers, brand leaders, partners, the industry at large, really. What should they be doing to better harness culture for effectiveness? Jim, I'm starting with you.
Sure. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about is this evolution in search and AI and the movement into LLMs to find things. And that's probably the question I've been asked the most from partners this week as we're talking through. And so one thing that I'm encouraging and recommending, this is based on the third-party reports, is that the LLMs are primarily trained from Reddit data. So I've talked a lot about the impact you can have on the platform using the insights and running ads there. But a really important trend and something to think about is the activity that you do on the platform on Reddit is what's going to show up in the LLMs and search as you move forward. And so staying relevant, finding those cultural trends, and then making sure you're showing up in the right spots. We did a small SMB event recently, and there was this company called Tree Amigos. It's an arborist out of Austin, and he had these alerts set up where anytime someone in r/Austin talked about trees, he jumped in there not to sell, but just to be an expert and to comment. And he said all of his customers come from Reddit until about 3 months ago. And he's like, I only do activity on Reddit, and now I'm getting customers from ChatGPT because it's training those models, and then people are finding me through these other sources. So that's the advice that I'm giving as we talk
That's
through.
a whole different panel, isn't it? Okay, that's amazing.
I
Annette.
love that. I think for me, just going back to the really listening, but listening with empathy and authenticity is really important. And my other advice is, if you haven't read it, buy the Culture Map book and read it. It's brilliant for conducting business, but also for really making sure you do that listening.
Reading the room.
I've read it. It's very good. My advice would be, in a nutshell, don't make ads. Don't even make campaigns. build worlds. And
Preach.
I think if you can build a world and you can make it authentic to what people care about and authentic to what they actually see reflected in themselves, they will love you for it, and it will do great things for everyone.
What a perfect note to end on. Guests, we thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thanks, Jessica.